Welcome to the You Triumph podcast, where we explore the triumphs, challenges, and the power of giving back. I'm your host, Trevor Sterling, and this season's theme is Be the Ladder. We'll highlight individuals who have not only achieved success, but have used their journey to uplift others, overcoming social barriers along the way. From their motivations to the lessons they've learned, we'll explore how they've become a ladder for others, proving that real success is about lifting those around you.
Welcome to another episode of the You Triumph Be the Ladder series podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Sterling, and today we have an inspirational guest, Jade Gani. Her story really touched me, both professionally and personally, I guess, because when she reached out to me some time ago, she referenced a case that I'd been involved with some years ago, the Jimmy Savile child abuse cases. And one of the kind things that she graciously said to me was the impact it had on her, but also this sense of achievement that she'd had, having been able to overcome some of the personal challenges which resonated from that case. So she was grateful for the fact that that case had really given a lot of people the confidence to come forwards and to be believed. So we are going to touch on some sensitive issues during the course of this podcast. But here's the thing, as is always the case with these podcasts, we're going to end with a really sunny final part to the podcast, which is what Jade has gone on to achieve, which is quite remarkable. Now, many people are blessed to become lawyers. Some are blessed to become partners, but it's unusual for individuals to go on to become not only the CEO of a law firm, their own law firm, but to do so in their early 30s. And yet that is what Jade has managed to do successfully. And when you hear her story, you'll understand just how remarkable that is. So welcome, Jade. Delighted to have you join us on this podcast.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, Jade, you put out a post on LinkedIn the other day, and I thought it was a really good place to start, actually, because there was an image that you put out, and in that image you referenced where your life was 15 years ago and before, and where your life is now. And where your life is now really takes us to the top of the ladder. So I'm just going to go through some of the aspects that were referred to in the image. So you are a multi-award-winning solicitor and CEO of your own company, Circe, no less. You are a director at the Association of Lifetime Lawyers. You are a legal LinkedIn influencer. You are a Law Society Wills and Equity Committee member. And you have won numerous awards and accolades on your journey to becoming and whilst CEO of your own company.
One or two, yeah.
One or two. And we're gonna dive back into those one or two, as you modestly say. But let's go back to 15 years ago or before. You attended state school.
I did.
You have suffered chronic illness. You had no legal connections, but managed to connect with the legal profession and have obviously managed to climb to the dizzy height of CEO. You came from a lower socioeconomic background. You were the survivor of child sexual abuse, and you lived within an abusive household. So it is against that backdrop that you've managed to somehow find the confidence and go on to create a law firm which is all about being the ladder and giving back. So, before we dive into the detail, icebreaker, can I ask you to give me one or two moments, pinch yourself moments? So we like to start with, I cannot believe that I did this. I cannot believe that I achieved this particular thing. What would your one or two pinch yourself moments be?
I think the first one that I had was actually winning the Step Private Client Global Awards, because it's just such a sort of titan in our industry. It's the gold standard for trust and estate work. And I was being measured at the time. I was working at a small high street firm in a private client department there, and I was being measured against trainees and other junior lawyers in some of the world's biggest law firms doing the most incredible things with huge resources that are available to them. And I felt like a very small fish in a very, very large pond. And it genuinely surprised me to be shortlisted, never mind to go on to win that award. And I think that in my career was my first pinch me moment. The judges recognised a lot of the charity work that I was doing and kind of the dedication I had to vulnerable and older people, and really appreciated it. And it seems that stood out to them. And I think my boss at the time nearly fell off his chair because he'd said the chances of you winning this are slim to none, respectfully. So I never let him live that one down. And then sort of since then, I think the greatest pinch me moment was after having started Circe Law. We'd been practicing, we'd been open for about 6 months or so, and we'd had a stream of work experience students come to us. And one of them, Jessica, was with us, and she was here for a month, and she was doing a phenomenal job. And I spoke to her and asked her about what her plans were after university. She was waiting to get her degree, and she wound up with a first in the end. And she was saying to me that she was considering doing the SQE and further education so she could qualify as a solicitor, but she wasn't sure if she could find this roughly £20,000 that she would need in order to kind of complete that on her own. And so I said to her, have you considered doing an apprenticeship? Instead, a graduate solicitor apprenticeship, and explained that the fees can be claimed through the levy, so small firms can offer them, and it means that she wouldn't incur this additional debt. And she hadn't considered it, so she went away and thought about it, and she came back and she said, well, I think it's a good idea, but I don't know anyone who would give me an apprenticeship. And I said, well, I would. And she looked at me dumbfounded. I said, you work really, really hard. I said, I think that you'll make an excellent lawyer, and I would love to give you an apprenticeship here. So she said, oh, amazing. Can I think about it? Can I talk to my family? So she did, and she came back. She said, my dad doesn't believe you. He wants an offer letter, a formal offer letter to discuss it. So I wrote her a formal offer letter, and then her contract and everything else. And she came back in, and the day that she handed me her signed contract for the apprenticeship, she said to me, thank you. I can't believe that you're doing this for me. And I turned to her and I said that she earned it. She worked really, really hard. She deserves it. She earns it. And it's actually a privilege for me to be able to give her this opportunity. And she got a bit emotional and said thanks and left my office. And the second she left, I sort of sat down and went, exhaled. And then I sort of burst into tears. And I thought, this is exactly why I want to do this. This is exactly why I wanted to have my own firm, to be able to support junior lawyers like her go on and have amazing careers.
I mean, what you said that particularly touched me there was how you burst into tears. You both burst into tears separately. Why did it mean so much to you?
Because I had a lot of obstacles in my way, in my career. And there were a lot of times that I thought that I wasn't actually going to qualify. I started my LPC after university. I worked at a firm for a couple of years, started my LPC, and I'd taken my first exams under my LPC when I went through a terrible divorce, which also resulted in me having no contact with my family as well. And my mother had terrible gambling addiction and would spend lots of money and that she didn't have. And because I'd sat my first exam at the LPC, when I went through all of this, I realised I couldn't afford. I was self-funding. I couldn't afford to continue. So I spoke to the university and asked them if I could defer my placement. And they said that they could, but obviously there were limits. Did I want to consider taking out the loan to cover the expenses? So I applied for the loan, and I remember sitting in the Sainsbury's car park. I'd gone after work to grab some stuff for dinner, and my phone rang, and it turned out it was a debt collection agency. And they said they'd been trying to get hold of me, and my mother had run up a load of debts in my name. Because I had applied for this loan, it sort of triggered them. The loan was rejected, and I knew that working on my sort of £14,000 salary at the time as a little legal assistant at the firm, I'm living alone with no support from anyone. I was never going to be able to save the funds that I needed in order to complete the LPC. And of course, once you start and you sit one of the exams, you have to complete it within a 5-year period. So I really felt like my career had just sort of disintegrated in front of me. And despite that, there was one person who really took a chance on me, and it was my old MD of the firm. And I told them I'd deferred while I tried to come up with a plan. And she sat me down and she said to me, why are you not pursuing the LPC still? And I broke down and I explained to her. And she said to me, look, we know you're going to make an excellent lawyer. We want to charge you out at solicitor's rate, not a junior's rate. So we're going to loan you the money to finish your LPC, which I was overjoyed with. So started it up again the next term, and they kept failing to put sort of the terms in place and ask for repayment of this loan. So I tracked her down and I said, I really, really want to start paying this back. Can you let me know? And this was about 6 months in, and she turned around and said to me, no, we're going to write it off as a thank you for your hard work. Like, you've worked really, really hard. And without her help and her support, and she gave me a training contract at the same time, I wouldn't have qualified as a lawyer. It's as simple as that. So having that moment with Jess was almost like being in her shoes and seeing it from the other side, and being able to just make things so much easier without all the heartache for Jess and the stress.
You've just so powerfully articulated what Be the Ladder is all about. That internal spirit to give back, particularly when you appreciate what it is to have difficulty in your life and you manage to navigate through that. If you can share that know-how with others, it makes their lives a lot easier and opens up the opportunity for so many people from difficult backgrounds. You said that you both became quite difficult. I was quite amused that her father was a little sceptical and said, why do you think that was? Why do you think when we offered to help, there's that sort of inherent skepticism?
Well, Jess comes from a similar background to me in some ways. Her family's amazing, but they're sort of on the lower income side of things. She comes from the same town that I grew up in. Again, went to state school, and
Which town?
That's Bracknell.
Bracknell.
In Berkshire, and she was the first to go to university and do those kinds of things as well. And I think they know that without any connections in law, without sort of being born and bred into that world, it's very hard to kind of break into that market. And so coming from doing sort of work experience with us just for a couple of weeks to then suddenly having not only a job offer, but an offer to progress her career so she can qualify as a solicitor in 2 years' time, it almost seemed too good to be true for him, I think. And I felt the same way when my old MD offered me the funds to continue my LPC. I felt like it was too good to be true, like the rug was going to be pulled at any moment, but it wasn't. And you have to trust in it. And whilst I can provide those opportunities, it really is what they do with those opportunities. It's not down to me. She's not going to be an excellent lawyer because I gave her that one chance. She's going to be an excellent lawyer because she works really, really hard at it, and she takes the most of that opportunity that I granted her.
But she certainly won't take it for granted. She'll feel a sense of determination really to not let you down, which is what is so incredible. When you give somebody the opportunity, they feel that they have to prove something, but in a different way, prove something which is that they were deserving of the opportunity which you gave them. So they worked that bit harder, and I was the same. I'm sure you were the same. I was trying to prove something to myself, that actually, I was as entitled to be a lawyer as anybody else, even though I didn't have those grades and qualifications. So before we go into your background, can you just tell us a bit more about your wonderful firm, so say your award-winning firm?
Yes, so I mean, Circe was born from an idea. I knew I always wanted to kind of be in a leadership role. I wanted to be able to help inspire and support other lawyers kind of do their best work. And when I was a trainee with that lovely MD that I had, I adored that firm. It was super friendly, it was super relaxed. They got me involved in a lot of the marketing and a lot of the business strategy side of things. I trained people. It didn't really matter what my title was in terms of a job. They were happy for me to get involved wherever I wanted to be involved. And I remember the MD saying to me once, one day you're going to sit in my seat. And that really inspired me. And I was so completely loyal to that company, adored it. But unfortunately, they suffered a mortgage fraud and had to close down. And so my MD helped me replace the rest of my training contract. I was 6 months out from qualifying. And so I think my entire career, I've kind of been searching for that environment again, with that kind of leader that can inspire, that you want to put your loyalty into. And I've found glimpses of it, but never anything quite right. And unfortunately, I had some really terrible experiences at some firms. I've faced a lot of sexism, a lot of ageism, a lot of racism even, because I'm mixed race. And it was awful. I mean, it culminated at one point that I was so kind of outcast that people thought it was okay to put cleaning products in my hot drinks if I left them unattended. So it got really, really, really bad. And at that point, I had started to gain some notoriety and people were interested in what I was doing in the law. And I was very fortunate to have some people say to me, if you want to make your own firm, we'll invest.
So how did you, because you've got two different aspects there, you've got the toxicity of a working environment where you mentioned horrifically they were prepared to, some people were prepared to put agents in your drink, but on the outside of the firm you were being recognised as an up and coming star within the legal profession. How was it you weren't being recognised within your firm, but yet the profession more widely was seeing what you were capable of?
It was incredibly frustrating. And the thing is, the allure for them hiring me was because I had this profile and because I affect change and, help form best practices in the industry. And they will tell you, we want change, in our departments. And I come in and I affect that change. And that's kind of the major catalyst for all of the problems that then happen. And, there were times where even my secretary would say things to me like, well, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, Jade. I don't mean to question your authority, but I don't think this is correct. And I don't mean to suggest you don't know what you're doing, but this is, we do it this way and things like that. And I'm sat there and I'm thinking, there are people in this like up and down the country who would message me for advice on how to follow like the best practice of something, who are, stalwarts in their own right, incredibly intelligent and qualified. And I have my secretary questioning everything that I do. I just thought this is really bizarre. And ultimately it was a decision, do I stay there and try and change this at a partnership level? And I could spend 10 years putting my heart and soul into this and not really making a dent. Or do I put that devotion into something that I create myself and start with the right environment?
Do you think that because you were very different, you mentioned ethnicity there, but also in terms of social status, you would have therefore had a different outlook. Do you think that was part of the problem? We hear about issues around lack of diversity in leadership, and then you have sort of groupthink. But if you actually move people from diverse backgrounds into leadership positions, you've then got to be prepared to accept change, because that's the advantage of bringing people through from different backgrounds. Was that your experience?
It was, absolutely. And a lot of people will like the thought of bringing somebody in who sort of ticks all those boxes. I've got my health conditions, mixed race, being a woman, young, because it's performative. They want to seem like they're affecting change and that they're not like everyone else. But when it comes to conversations behind those closed doors, when it comes to affecting actual real change, they don't want to hear it, because as human beings, we often don't want to hear about how we might be failing or not doing things quite rightly. And often I find it's quite difficult with men as a woman trying to convey these issues, because predominantly in those C-suites in law firms, it tends to be men. And you're often kind of put off and told that, you're being hysterical, you're overreacting, or you're too emotional about situations. And they don't want to address some of the bigger, more blatant issues, never mind the microaggressions that go on as well.
One of my earlier guests, the brilliant Amandeep Kazria, who went on to become a partner at Moore Barlow, but in a previous existence, she faced various challenges which were very similar to the type you articulated. She's done a lot of work around women in leadership, the challenge for women to break through. And like yourself, it's not just about the difficulties of being a woman, but it's a woman of ethnicity as well. So it's intersectional, isn't it?
It is.
Can you just tell us a bit more about your ethnicity?
Yes, so I'm part Indian, part Scottish is kind of the main mix. So on my dad's side, his family were all Indian, but he didn't actually know his biological dad. So I have this weird disconnect with some of my Indian heritage, and actually got closer to that when I was working in Slough, because there's a large Asian community there. And they would tell me things about where my name comes from and what it means and all those kinds of things that I'd never really kind of known before. And then on my mother's side, that's the Scottish side of the family, and I was mostly raised by my little Scottish nan, bless her. And so I have this unique kind of position, because whilst yes, I am mixed race, I am passably white. And so sometimes I get to peer behind the veil almost, and people forget that I'm not just one thing or the other. And so it's a unique experience. I could never speak to the experience of someone who is perceived as being brown or black in this world, and I could never sort of speak to the experience of someone who's entirely white in this world. I have one foot in each kind of camp, and I see the best and the worst, I think, sometimes of both. And my sense of identity is really, it's difficult for me to kind of identify. It's wrapped up in so much emotion and so many incidences when I was younger, and racism directed at me or at my dad, and just our family situation, that it's quite emotional. And I find sometimes I hesitate on speaking out on race issues because I feel like I'm too white, and then other times I feel like I need to use that white side of me to speak up for these issues, because that's my privilege and I should be using that for the greater good. So it's a really tricky topic for me to navigate.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because being from a dual heritage group, in a way, shouldn't matter. But it does matter. You're pulled one way or the other, which suggests that there are still issues within society which are based on race. Now, we'd like to think that there isn't, but clearly there is, because you mentioned there, I think it was a really powerful statement, in the sense that when you think of your white heritage, you could use that to be able to take on some of the challenges, which suggested that if you're white, then you are in a position potentially of advantage, which you don't have if you're from an ethnic community. And that's your lived experience, isn't it?
It absolutely is, yeah, and I'm sure it's the same for many others. And I have had many tough conversations with my white friends to point out, some of their own privilege and, some of their biases and things that they don't even know, because it's so ingrained, it's so systemic. And, they're good enough that they have those conversations with me and their perspectives start to shift and they start to change. I think one conversation at a time can really make a difference. And I never approach those conversations by saying, you're a terrible person, you're horrible, you're a racist. I start those conversations by saying, okay, well, let's just consider this other perspective, right? You're a good person, you're kind, you're thoughtful. I wouldn't be friends with you or spend the time having this conversation with you if I thought otherwise. So let's use that and lean into your empathy and your other nice qualities for you to be able to see this from another perspective. And actually, one of my oldest friends, when I first started talking about race issues, my friends very much have seen me from the white side of things growing up. And one of my oldest friends who now works at Circe as well, I did a post on Instagram and it was talking about my link with my father and that side of my heritage, and how I always felt like I was half of one and half of the other, and how difficult that was for me growing up. And she actually sent me a really emotional message afterwards, and she just said she had no idea how I'd felt my entire life, and the things she had taken for granted with us growing up, and how she wished we could have had those conversations when I was younger so she could support me. And so since then, I've tried really hard not to shy away from those conversations and kind of highlight those perspectives.
Your story is all the more inspirational because you're championing change and diversity, but there's this other really troubling part of your past as well, and I know that you're open to talk about it. And I think for our listeners, I think it's probably important that we do, which relates to child abuse, something which I became very passionate about as a campaigner for a period because of my involvement with Jimmy Savile cases, and I realised that it gave me an opportunity to speak out on behalf of victims. Can you just tell us a bit about your experiences there, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's two sides to this. There is kind of the home life. Amongst my parents, there was always problems with drink. My mother had gambling. There was often infidelity. And for us as children, my mother in particular, I don't think she's the type of person who should have children. I think she's quite cruel and uses them as a tool, a form of manipulation. And she would be emotionally, physically, verbally abusive to us. There's times where she's punched me and knocked me to the floor, and she's dragged me by my hair, or, scratched or spat at me and said some really, really horrible things to me as a child. That when I look at my sort of nieces and nephews, my adoptive nieces and nephews from all my lovely friends, I couldn't imagine ever treating a child that way. It horrifies me. But as so many children in those situations do, they sort of turn that inward. and they become quite quiet and removed. I was always told, oh, well, she's older than her years. I was a bright child. My reading level was far beyond that of my age. And I would take myself off and escape into books to try and hide from what was happening around me. And during this time as well, my dad would be away because he was in the Navy for 18 years of his life. And so there were long periods where he wouldn't be around. And my relationship with him was very difficult because he wasn't always the most pleasant man to be around, but he came from an extremely abusive childhood, so much worse than I could ever imagine. And he joined the Navy at 16 to get away from that. And so I think he was never taught how to kind of be a parent and how to show his emotions in a healthy way and self-regulate. And so there were times he could be really tender with us as children, and then there were times where we were absolutely terrified of him. My relationship changed as I got older with him, and after some traumatic events, we formed quite a close bond. But that's kind of the home life that I came from. And then what we tend to find is that where there are children that are in those environments and they're quiet and they keep their parents' secrets because that's, what they're expected to do, they often then can become the targets for other predators. Because they know that they're going to stay quiet and they're not going to cause trouble and rock the boat. And so unfortunately, a neighbour, just another block along from where I was, he had multiple children. My little sister was friends with them. She would play with them and I would babysit them. And then when he had a new child and his wife started going out to work in the evenings, he would ask me to come over to help look after the baby. And this is where it started, that he began grooming me, and then he began sexually abusing me, trying to convince me to run away with him and take the child with him. And this went on for a number of years between the ages of 11 and 14. And then came the day when they were due to move and I was supposed to help them move house. And I just decided, no, I can't. If I don't know where they're going, I can end this now. But I think what people don't realise about sort of grooming is the insidiousness. People hear that I've been groomed and sexually abused and they focus on the sexual abuse, which, yes, is not ideal. But I think the worst thing for me to get over was the psychological grooming. Because as a child, I very much loved him. He made me love him. And that was real for me as a child. But at the same time, there's a part of you where alarm bells are going off, knowing it's wrong, knowing it's not right, feeling pressured, feeling stressed and anxious all the time. And it took a long, long time to kind of unpick that wiring.
And how do you feel about it now? Because as an adult reflecting back, you're able to have a different judgment of himself, but also your understanding would have changed. What's your thoughts now?
I think that he's ill, is what I think. I watched a documentary one time, and it was this incredible kind of expose of the kind of dark web and paedophiles on there. And there was a gentleman who agreed to be interviewed, and he said that he doesn't want to do these things, but because there's such a stigma and he can't come forward and talk about it and get the help he needs, he's put in situations where he's sort of alone with his niece and things like that, which then is tempting him, and he's trying really hard. And I think some people are really quite evil, but in a lot of cases, I feel like we don't have a system in place that can support people that have those urges. And I very much believe that kind of sexuality is on a spectrum. And if I believe that, then unfortunately, child abusers fit on that spectrum somewhere too. And so if I believe that, I think that we need to create a society where they can come forward before they commit those acts, where they can get the help that they need. And I think Germany have some great programs that do something similar to that, where they can come forward, get the support that they need. And essentially, it's also helping to safeguard those children before something happens rather than after the event.
There's a sense of guilt that many people feel when they become a victim or a survivor of child abuse. What would you say to those that may be listening to this podcast who have had those similar experiences? What might you be able to say to them which in some ways would help them to come to terms with what's happened to them?
I'd say that you deserved more. You absolutely deserved more from the systems. You deserved more from the people around you. You deserved that protection, and it's heartbreaking that you didn't get it. But there is absolutely nothing, not a thing that they should feel guilty about.
Well, that's certainly the powerful takeaway that I took from Deirdre's case. So I really appreciate you you sharing those stories.
Well, thank you for supporting those victims. The shockwaves of that, the impact that will have had up and down the country, I think is incredibly profound. So thank you.
It was, I found it really reassuring that so many people came out and felt able to speak and to tell their truth and to be listened to. And I think that's incredibly important. The being able to speak is one thing, but to be listened to and to be heard, I think is really important. So I think from what you've just done there and from the work I've done historically, hopefully bringing these two things together, more people will feel empowered to come out and speak. And so, really difficult childhood. You're into your teens. How did you manage to transition then from somebody who'd been through those experiences, the relationship challenges with your mother and your father, and you talked about gambling, and actually earlier on you referred to how she managed to gamble away the money you had for your studies later. But you still went on to do A-levels, and you were the first in your family, I think, to achieve the academic height. How did you manage to do that?
I think I've always been a bit of the black sheep of the family, and I do take after my dad in many respects, and he was an incredibly intelligent individual, but he just never had the kind of right environment to help him flourish in that way. I think had he had a supportive family, he probably could have gone on to university and done great things. But in my family, the rest of my siblings, they had a couple of GCSEs to rub together, I would say. But for me, I always knew since a very small age I wanted to work in law. I had a very strong sense of justice, as do many people who've been the victims of, these horrible crimes. And I knew I wanted to do that, and I knew that in order to get there, I needed a certain level of education, I needed certain grades. And so for me, it was just seeing where I wanted to go and working backwards, and then just taking one of those one step at, each of those a step at a time to get there. So I was very focused on my school. I saw it as a lifeline, as a way to get out of this life, as a way to break generational cycles, as a way to kind of create the life that I always wanted, so that I can then give back to other people and help them create the lives they wanted.
And that life you always wanted was about a life of purpose.
Yes.
Because some people, they want a life, they want a career, and others want a life of purpose. And for you, it was about, if I become a lawyer, I can fulfil this purpose and go on to the things that you talked about earlier on. Is that?
Exactly. I can help people. That was the idea behind being a lawyer, is that I can help people in whatever speciality I go into. I can help people who need support. And from there, as my profile began to grow, I'm not really one for sort of fame and fortune. I'm not motivated by money in any way, shape or form. And so for me, that's great. The attention sometimes there's a great deal of pressure with it, and it does make me feel really anxious. But I remind myself that by having that platform and being well respected, there's also kind of a sense of impact that you can have with that. I can use that towards the greater good as well, and help more people on a wider scale than I have been able to in the past. So again, I suffer the stress of that and the pressure, again, for the hope that I'll be able to help other people.
Your story is incredible, because we've heard that first rung of the ladder, the family challenges, etc. We've also touched on the middle of the ladder, the studying. There was no one around you within your family that had made it through to do A-levels, university, etc. And there you were trying to furrow your own path to meet this purpose that you have, which is to give back. And so you get a degree. Was it a 2-2?
Yeah.
Just about got
So I found a degree level is where everything kind of caught up to me. So my central nervous system was starting to kind of relax, being outside of these abusive environments, getting some kind of consistency. And as happens to many people who've been through similar things, my body went through a lot of physical changes, and I developed a condition known as Circe syndrome, which is like a fake heart attack condition. My heart is fine, but I get all the pain and everything that comes with it. And that then led on to fibromyalgia, which is like widespread pain throughout your body. So I spent multiple years trying to be diagnosed, and this was all throughout my university years. And there were days where I was in so much agony that it would take me about half an hour to just sit upright in bed, never mind get washed, get dressed, lug all of my massive textbooks, up to campus and sit through my classes. And so mentally and physically, I was completely drained and exhausted. And I went from being a student that would get 100% in like GCSEs and A levels to barely scraping by at degree level. I tried to get support from the university, and because I didn't have a diagnosis, there wasn't much forthcoming. And after I qualified, I actually got an apology letter from them for having not supported me during that time. And shortly after I left is when I had my, diagnosis of fibromyalgia. So I did wind up getting a 2-2, which for me, I was horrified because I'd been this A+ student.
Pass is a pass, right?
But it is, and I was worried I wasn't going to get a training contract, and so I took the route of just applying for free work experience. And then when I got that work experience, I just worked my bum off and really tried to show them who I was and how dedicated I was. And that's what led to this. I went from a week's free work experience to a temporary contract, and then from a temporary contract to a permanent assistant role, and then just learning as much as I possibly could before I got my training contract.
And which university did you go to?
The University of Kent, Canterbury.
Because there's a really important lesson in this. You mentioned that you were fearful, having got a 2-2, that might have restricted your access into the legal profession. Because we know that even now, law firms can still sometimes think you have to have gone to the right type of university and have got the right level of grade. Now, for those that are listening that have got a 2-2, you've shown the way to supplement that. You said you started with work experience. You can really bring to play both your life experiences past, or develop new experiences by doing voluntary work, etc., to make that 2-2 a very powerful 2-2. Is that something that you would agree with?
Absolutely. And I've worked at firms where they categorically say that they won't accept applications from people with less than a 2-1 or a first, but they've headhunted me and brought me on. So it makes me laugh when I hear that. And actually one of my old MDs, I did say to him, I said, you do realise I got a 2-2 when he was saying this to me? And his face kind of dropped. And he was like, well, what happened? I said, why does anything need to have happened? You know that I'm good at my job. You know I get things done. You know my clients like me. So why should a grade, a number on a piece of paper that's determined on one day where anything could have gone wrong, your mind could have gone completely blank? I said, exams are not a true reflection of the individuals that we are. They really aren't. And we put too much pressure on them. And I say to all of my junior team members, whilst I'm proud of them if they do really well, of course, I say to them that I can teach you everything that you need to know on the job. But what I can't teach you is your work ethic. What I can't teach you is your common sense and how you're going to get these things done. What I can't teach you is how personable you are with your clients, that connection you have with them. So I look for those other things first and know I can teach them everything else.
And I always say you can power up your 2-2 with life experiences. And if you do, that's the best first you'll ever have. There's something about having overcome struggle and challenge, and if you've ended up with a 2-2, those life experiences added to that 2-2 are the best first you'll ever have. And I think again you've shown that, and then some. So then you find yourself with fibromyalgia. You've managed to get a 2-2. You're doing work experience. You've got this background of other adversity and challenge. It sounds like a really silly question, but where did this tremendous confidence come from?
I think it was less confidence and more desperation.
Right.
To get somewhere. I always had the mentality like I will suffer now so that in the long term I don't have to. And I wrote off kind of my 20s of really putting in that hard graft. And because I was earning so little as a legal assistant and sort of doing my training and things at the weekends, I was taking up second or third jobs sometimes in the evenings, tutoring or waitressing or doing things to make ends meet. And it was brutal. I barely saw any of my friends. But in my head, I kept saying to myself, if I do this now, it will set me up for the rest of my life. So even though I'm in pain, even though I'm exhausted, even though mentally I'm totally drained and burned out, keep going, keep pushing, because it is all going to be worth it. And there were times I doubted that, and there have been plenty of meltdowns along the way, thinking that maybe it was all for nothing and maybe I should quit. But then I just remind myself I kind of think of myself as the child version of me, my inner child. And I say to myself, what does she deserve? Nobody else fought for her. Nobody else, pushed her. Nobody else saw her potential. You have to be the one that does that. So you're not giving up. You have to keep going.
I love that. What does she deserve? So now you would think that having overcome all of these problems, setting up a law firm probably wouldn't be the most challenging thing of all the things you had to overcome. But of course, we went through a little thing called a global pandemic in 2000. Yep. What year was it that you set your firm up?
2023.
2023. So post-pandemic, but having been through a pandemic, you then thought, that's
bonkers.
Brilliant.
When I think about it now, I just think, what planet was I on? Starting a firm with a full team of staff, with no guaranteed work right after the pandemic. But we specialise in private clients, so it's death and taxes. They're kind of recession-proof, apocalypse-proof. There's always going to be death and taxes, isn't there? And so it was the biggest bet that I ever made on myself. Was it confidence? Was it foolhardiness? Was I naive? Probably a mixture of all of those things. And at times I've sat here and thought it's the worst thing I've ever done. But the majority of the time I sit here and think it's absolutely the best thing I've ever done. I have no regrets, as hard as it's been.
What makes it such a great thing to have done?
It's the little things for me. So I'll sit here in my office and I hear the banter going backwards and forwards between team members and the genuine laughter and how they care and support each other. Somebody's car broke down at the weekend and one of their colleagues has gone and helped them and fixed it and sorted it out. Or it's when my Gen Z employees sass me back and make jokes about how old I am now because of my grey hairs. And I think, do you know what? It's these little moments that I don't see in other law firms. The juniors are terrified to speak to a managing partner, sometimes the way that they speak to me. But I take comfort in that because I know that I've created an environment where they feel so comfortable that they can just be themselves. And that's really, really important to me. So it's little moments like that, I think, that make it so worthwhile. And I sit in here like a Cheshire cat with a grin on my face, just sort of laughing to myself.
So for anybody listening to this rather than watching this on YouTube, you mentioned grey hair.
This is good lighting.
Compared to what I have. I think you were about 6 years PQE with a post-qualification. Was that when you set up the business?
Yes. So when I applied for the SRA for permission to start the ABS, I had just passed the mark that they need you to be in order to start the firm. So it was 6 years.
I'm guessing you're mid-30s, early 30s?
34, yeah.
You're 34. And CEO of their own law firm, which they set up, what would be now 2-3 years ago. That's 6 years PQE against the backdrop of all of those challenges that we've overcome. And when you say the reason why you love it is you mentioned your people and your clients and the ability to be able to use your values and create a law practice in a truly modern sense, open to all, accessible by all. I think it's worth sharing with the listeners because I touched upon this at the start. You obviously talked about the STEP Global Award, the Private Client Awards. I think in 2021 you were the youngest practitioner of the year. You went on to become a judge at those same awards. The British Wills and Probate Awards Industry Champion 2021 finalist, Probate Research Awards Best Community Contribution Team winner, British Wills and Probate Awards Youngest Practitioner of the Year 2020 winner, guest writer for today's Wills and Probate publications and featured writer for Law Skills, as well as Inspirational Woman in Law Awards 2023 Champion of the Year award finalist. I mean, that is a list to be proud of for somebody who, who's come from what you described as, a background of lower socioeconomics, but also to have been exposed to the level of abuse that you went through, and in the workplace with a disability which you had to overcome through your studies and your work. And then you touched upon the toxic environment sometimes which you're exposed to at work, and you come out of that and you say, I'm going to use everything I've learned from those experiences and create a law firm that is going to be the perfect ladder for those aspiring lawyers, and we're going to deliver great things for potential clients. That is a huge, huge achievement, Jade, and I want to thank you for opening up on some of those personal, intimate moments. I know they would have been difficult, but above all, I want to thank you for demonstrating to every single person listening to this podcast that ordinary people can and do achieve the extraordinary, and one must not just aspire to climb the ladder, they must be the ladder, and you've epitomised that. So thank you for joining us on this podcast. Is there a final message that you would like to give to anybody listening to this podcast now?
I think there's probably just one or two, in that the things that happen to us in our life, these traumatic events, that it's okay to let them shape you, but just don't ever let them define you. You know, you are and always were someone before, during and after all of that happened to you. And there will be a lot of naysayers. Do not listen to a single one of them, because at the end of the day, you are the only person who knows exactly what you are capable of. So if you can dream it, you can be it.
Yeah, it's lovely. What does Circe stand for?
So I know that a lot of men tend to name their law firms after themselves, but with such a unique surname as mine, I was keen not to kind of isolate ourselves or put a label on us before they even knew who we were. So I was actually researching the properties of jade, because in Asian cultures, it's used in lots of different things. And an ancient hand scholar actually wrote the 5 virtues of jade in his great dictionary, and kind of modernized and translated, they were courage, integrity, respect, charity, and equity. And the first letter of those spelled Circe, who happens to be a really badass goddess, Greek goddess, who she was also a sorceress, and she had a reputation for turning men that she didn't like, who displeased her, into pigs, into swine, which really made me laugh when I read it. And I thought, I get accused of being this raging feminist so often. I just thought it was perfect. And so that's how we came to be.
Well, that is a wonderful way to end this podcast, because I hope you like me. I don't get to a point that you don't like me because of the pig-like qualities that I might assume otherwise. So
I think you are safe for life.
Good, thank you. I'll make sure I don't upset you. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Trevor. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for the You Triumph podcast. I've been your host, Trevor Sterling, and this has been a journey of triumphs, challenges, and the power of giving back. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and leave a review. Your support helps others discover the show and the valuable lessons shared. For more information about You Triumph and how we can assist with motivational speaking, consultancy, or event needs, visit youtriumph.co.uk. Join us next time as we continue to explore the stories and strategies behind success and becoming a ladder for others. Remember, triumph isn't just about climbing the ladder, it's about becoming the ladder and lifting others along the way. I want to express sincere gratitude to our sponsors for their invaluable support. PLG Consultants, Harrison Associates, Moore Barlow Lawyers, the Stephen James Partnership and Radio Jackie have been instrumental in making the You Triumph podcast a reality. To our listeners, I encourage you to check out the great work of these sponsors. It's because of their partnership that we can continue bringing these important stories and insights to you. Thank you once again for standing with us and supporting the You Triumph podcast.